Well, not really read. I want to discuss the failed negotiations that are happening right now between the United States and Russia, because it's not happening between Ukraine and Russia, and it's definitely not happening between um, Ukraine and the United States.
Another day of wasting any time. I've got a lot to say, can't hold it in this time. No filter, I got no filter, no filter.
Because we are definitely going to talk about the fact that once again, Trump is blaming Zelenskyy. Trump is blaming Zelenskyy for the failed negotiation in Moscow that just happened. Believe it or not, Trump found a way to blame Zelenskyy for the fact that Russia has rejected the peace plan, because Russia has all but rejected the peace plan during the negotiation talks. It's not even a controversial, it's not even speculation at this point. Russia, of course, has said, no, we didn't reject. We just sort of we had a great conversation. We had a great conversation. We did not reject anything. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's all good. In fact, okay, let's go in order. Let's go in some form of let's do it in some form of chronological order, okay? We'll go through statements one by one and we'll untangle this mess. But let's start with a little bit of context. I assume that everybody here knows what's happening with these conversations, with these talks, but it all started with Witkoff and Dmitriev, the Russian representative, having a conversation after Witkoff has coached the Russian side on how to handle Donald Trump, which is very interesting that the American side is supporting Russia in coaching it on how to talk with the American president. It is a little bit of an unprecedented situation in which, instead of doing their jobs, the American politicians do aid Russian politicians in doing theirs. That is not something that we have witnessed before, for sure. There's a war in Ukraine. Maybe you haven't heard of it. Maybe you have not heard of the fact that there's been a war raging between Russia and Ukraine since 2014. But it was a limited conflict in the region of Ukraine called the Donbass. And in 2022, Russia has decided to turn it into a full-scale invasion that would engulf the entirety of Ukraine. That is the starting point of what we're talking about. Fast forward to now, we have a new president. Well, not so new anymore. It has always been basically a year since his inauguration. But we have a new president after Joe Biden. This new president has promised that he would solve this conflict that has been going on for over 10 years now, that he would solve it in 24 hours, that he would solve it even before the 24 hours, that he would solve it before even taking office, that it would be no problem, that he would do it very quickly. It is almost 2026 and we are no closer to this conflict ending. We are no closer to this war ending. And in addition, Russia, there's been a very big paradigm shift. That is also context that is, I think it should be drilled over and over and over again. The whole paradigm of US-Russia relations have completely shifted ever since Trump took office. Under Biden, it was, we will not talk to Russia. Russia is the aggressor. Russia is genociding Ukrainian people. we will support Ukraine, even if the support was quite frankly lacking, which is a topic for another day. But the fact remains that the policy of the Biden administration was in fact aiding Ukraine. New aid packages were approved and shipped, and things were moving along, even if not ideally, they were moving along. The paradigm shift is that, first of all, the United States under Trump says that Trump repeatedly says, it's not my war. It is not my war at all. It's Biden's war. I have inherited this war from Joe Biden. This war would have never happened if I were president, a statement that has no evidence. There's no facts that point to the fact that there would be no war if Trump would have been president when it erupted. There's absolutely nothing indicating that Vladimir Putin would not have decided to invade under Trump. So you can just forget about treating that statement with any level of seriousness. It is not a serious statement. It is an empty boast. Trump had the opportunity during his first term to end the conflict that was raging on since 2014. He did not do it. So I am very confident that whoever would have been the president of the United States in 2022, Vladimir Putin would still have invaded. If it were Trump, he still would have invaded. I have no real evidence to back that up, but it is my strong assertion that that would have still been the case. We still would have been in the same situation as now, but I would say that under Trump, it probably would have been worse now than what we have. But that is also, of course, something that I'm asserting. That is my personal opinion. That if Trump were to be president in 2022, we would have had a far worse situation right now on the ground in Ukraine and in Europe in general. Okay, so that is the broader context for the conflict, for the paradigm shift. Oh, wait, no, I'm not done yet, actually. I am not done setting the stage yet, because there has been a whole different new difference that happened between Biden and Trump. And that is, who is considered to blame for the invasion. Yeah, believe it or not, that suddenly seems to be a topic of contention. When Biden was president, I believe, it was not a topic of contention. It was widely accepted that Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine, that the invasion was, that Russia was the sole party responsible for the invasion. It's the aggressor. And if you want to blame anybody for the invasion, it should be Russia, of course. It's a no-brainer. But that all changed under Donald Trump. Right now, it is hard to say who the Trump administration blames for the war. Sometimes it's the president of Ukraine, Zelenskyy. He pushed for the war. As Trump has said on numerous occasions, Ukraine should not have pushed for this war if it were not prepared to win, that Ukraine should not have pushed for a war with a much bigger country, that Zelenskyy should not have pushed for this war, basically saying that Zelenskyy is the fearmonger that attacked Russia. From what Trump is saying, you might be led to believe that the aggressor in this war is actually Ukraine and not the other way around, which is a hard sell to anybody that knows anything about this conflict and that have followed it since 2022 or even earlier. But Trump is not even consistent in blaming Zelenskyy. Actually, he also sometimes blames Joe Biden. it was Joe Biden that pushed for this war. It was Joe Biden that wanted this conflict. So sometimes it's Zelenskyy, sometimes it's Biden, sometimes it's both. But that's not even the most important thing. The most important thing is that from the changing of the presidents of the United States, from Biden to Trump, the blame for the war, the responsibility for the war has been shifted from Russia to Ukraine. And that has also been reflected in Russia's, the United States policy in resolving this war. Since Ukraine is being seen as the party responsible for the war, the majority of pressure is being put on Ukraine to end this war, to give concessions, to give up territory, to limit its military, to give Russia control over its internal policy, external policy. What kind of language should be the language of the state? What kind of religion should be state religion? How many troops can Ukraine hold within its borders during peace and wartime? What kind of weapons can Ukraine mount? What sort of allies can Ukraine have? What sort of alliances can Ukraine enter? What kind of economic blocks can Ukraine enter? All these things the United States believes should be in the decision-making capacity of Russia, because Ukraine just should not have fought with such a strong enemy if they did not know that they could win. And of course, there's the fact that Russia feels, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The physical manifestation of this change of policy between the United States, Ukraine, and Russia is the 28-point peace plan that has emerged very recently from the talks between the special envoy Witkoff and Dmitriev on the side of Russia. A proposal that is treated as a business deal, basically between the United States of America and Russia, that would not only give Russia all that it wants in this war, but it would also open the door to lucrative business, to rebuilding of Russia's economy and profit for the United States at the expense of European security. That was basically what the recent plan has made happen. One of the points of the 28th plan is that the entirety of the Donbass, including territories that Russia has not conquered yet, would be given to Russia. And that was of course unacceptable to Ukraine, because that would mean not only that troops would have to retreat from places that they were able to defend till now, that people have bled and died to defend till now, but it would also mean that Ukraine would be given up strategic key territories that are most fortified and that allow Ukraine to keep defending itself against the Russian aggression. It would open the doors for a future invasion for Russia. And it also renders, because some time ago, I would like to remind everybody, because this topic has been forgotten all too quickly, the United States has signed a very unfavorable deal with Ukraine, a minerals deal, a rare earth mineral deal, which basically gave a lucrative business deal to the United States on Ukrainian resources, which a lot of them happen to be in Donbass, which is an important thing to note here, in exchange for continuous support on the United States side. So this minerals deal has now been rendered a useless piece of paper. Not only is the United States not continuing any sort of support for Ukraine. Donald Trump has all but announced that his country, the USA, is not involved financially with Ukraine anymore. Right now, the United States is selling arms to NATO, not to Ukraine, to NATO. And NATO may do with these weapons what it wants. It might give them to Ukraine. It might not give them to Ukraine. It might just keep those weapons to itself. It doesn't matter to Trump. All aid for Ukraine has been effectively halted. So I have to ask, why has Ukraine signed any mineral deal if it has been rendered useless so quickly? Especially if Ukraine would give up the Donbass, then it would give up a huge portion of those minerals that are in the mineral deal with the United States, which the United States do not seem to care about in the slightest. Because, you know what? That's a third big difference that has emerged from the administration changing from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. As much as we can say that the Biden administration was not the greatest one, the Trump administration is far worse. Far, far worse. Because the Biden administration was treating this conflict as I would say, traditional diplomacy between countries, actual diplomacy between countries, statecraft, IR, international relations, the typical stuff. But the Trump administration treats the whole thing as a business deal. That is an important thing. It treats the war as an opportunity to make money. And that means that whoever can give the US the best deal will be the person that the United States will favor in this. This is something that I have warned against when the United States was pushing and pressuring Ukraine to sign the minerals deal. That if the United States truly treats this just as business, that if the United States truly only thinks about when and where it can profit, then all that Russia has to do is to offer the United States a better deal. All that Russia has to do in this sort of configuration is give the United States a better deal. And it seems that it has, because behind closed doors, Russia and the United States are already discussing long-term profit, long-term economical future, with the exclusion of talking about Ukraine at all, actually. So already a bright future is being planned for the cooperation between these two countries. Oh yeah, the fourth difference is, of course, that under Joe Biden, the United States still treated Europe as strategic partners and allies. And under the Trump administration, there seems to be a very visible shift towards Russia being treated as a partner and an ally, and Europe being seen more as a pest at best and an opponent at worst. So that is also a big difference that has emerged from this whole messy situation. So we got the 28-point plan. Those were horrible, unacceptable points. I went through them one by one on a separate stream. A lot of them were just straight up non-starters, like giving full amnesty to all war criminals through this conflict. That was absolutely an unacceptable proposal for Ukraine. There was no clear indication, in my opinion, in these points that the Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped by the Russian Federation would be returned. There were a lot of points there that were very vague. What is very telling about this proposal, the initial proposal of 28 points, is that it was very vague on the security guarantees for Ukraine It mentioned nothing that Russia would have to do, but it mentioned in very great detail. It didn't just mention, it described in great detail what Ukraine would have to do, give up, and concede to. That is a very, very important thing to note. It was very detailed and precise on the demands towards Ukraine, but it was very vague and open to interpretation as to its demands for Russia. So ever since the plan has been received, it came out that it has been penned by Russia, of course. And it's turned out it's very much blindsided the entirety of the West. Well, it has not blindsided the United States because of the things that I've mentioned before. It's for the United States, it's basically part of its strategy. But this has certainly blindsided Europe. Europe was not prepared for this. Europe was just caught with it pants down, because in normal situations, in normal acts of diplomacy and negotiation, usually both sides come up with their own proposals. They meet, they show their proposals, they confront those proposals, they compare them, those proposals clash, and both sides meet in the middle, so to speak. They see where each of the sides can give some space, can give some room to negotiate. But the thing is that in this case, Russia has dictated the pace, Russia has dictated the shape of these negotiations by creating a starting point for it all through its 28-point plan. There was no European counterproposal. The so-called counterproposal was Europe taking and tweaking the existing 28 points, which is a not good starting point for negotiation. The good starting point for negotiation would be Europe having put forward its own plan based on the needs of Ukraine. Europe and Ukraine together should have created their own plan with their own points, and that should have been put forward against the 28 points that were penned by Russia. It should not have been just a tweaking of the Russian perspective, because let's be honest, those 28 initial points were just a wish list from the Russian Federation, the absolute maximalist demands that Russia pushed for. Completely unacceptable. The unacceptable should not be the starting point for creating a counterproposal. So after that happened, the United States, I'm giving you an abridged, a lot of has happened in the meantime. The United States has sent 2 people to Russia to continue negotiations with a changed plan after a lot of discussion, negotiation. The plan has been trimmed to 20 points. And the special envoy to regarding this conflict, Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have been sent to Moscow to continue negotiations. In Moscow, these people have wined and dined, talk about the beauty of Moscow, talked to Vladimir Putin about what he is willing to concede, what he is not willing to concede. It is a very crucial thing to point out that I have no clue what Kushner's exact role in the government is. He is an advisor to Trump. I don't think he holds any kind of office. He's just an advisor to Donald Trump. Of course, he's a family member, being his son-in-law. He is first and foremost a businessman, a business broker. He has no experience with diplomacy whatsoever. Same goes for Witkoff, by the way, the special envoy who has only experience in real estate. None of these people have any experience in diplomacy between countries, between states. And they are dealing with veterans of very shrewd, very brutal diplomacy during the biggest war since World War II. To call it irresponsible, to call it very naive would be an understatement of the century. Unless the point is not diplomacy, unless the point is to just try to push an ending to this conflict as fast as possible and move towards profit at the cost of Ukraine, which I believe is absolutely the case. But I think the United States underestimates the Russian side because the Russian side does not want just money. The Russian side, unlike the US side, is not just looking to profit from all of this. The Russian side has its own geopolitical goals in this. And an important thing is to get Ukraine, to rebuild an empire, to rebuild the global influence that the USSR had. Those are the goals that no lucrative deal can give to Russia, the thing that it really wants. And this goal will remain whether or not Putin will be in power. To those who think that once Putin dies, the ambitions of Russia against Ukraine will die with him, that is a very naive hope. Russia will continue its campaign against Ukraine even after Putin is long dead. That is my firm belief. There is just too much ingrained right now in Russian politics regarding the project of rebuilding an empire that it goes far beyond just one man, which is Vladimir Putin. So those are my 2 cents when it comes to this topic. This naive hope that once Putin dies, all of it will end. No, all of it will continue just as now, but under somebody else. That is my prediction when it comes to this particular point. But let's go back to the negotiations, because I already did a segment on the negotiation. I already said that they seem to be, the last time that we looked at these negotiations, they were going so-so. They did some small talk about the visit. They talked about key interests of Russia. But now we know 100% that not only have the negotiations ended in failure, Russia has reiterated once again that it wants everything that it said that it wanted from the very beginning of the war, that it will not move an inch on its demands, that it will not compromise on anything. This has resulted in a meeting between Putin and Trump being canceled. This, I believe, has also resulted in a meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump being canceled. The negotiations have went to hell. I must say that it all went just as I had predicted. There's a big rift between Ukraine and Russia. What is acceptable to Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable to Russia. What is acceptable to Russia will be absolutely unacceptable to Ukraine. So even if Trump will tell you, which he says very often, that the conversations are going well, that we might see something good happen very soon, that we are very close to having a deal, do not believe any of that. That is nonsense. Only believe it when you see a signed document between Ukraine and Russia. Until then, do not believe a single word that Trump says. Just treat it as fluff. Treat it as PR nonsense that will lead to nothing, because these countries just have too much differences when it comes to what they are willing to agree to. And in my mind, Russia has to be pressured in a real way to concessions. Russia cannot be pleaded with to agree to concessions. Russia cannot be asked nicely, please agree to move away from these demands, from those demands. No, the situation on the ground has to change in a measurable way for Russia to conclude that the invasion is not profitable anymore, that it's not sustainable anymore. Right now, Russia feels that it can just continue the war. It has no incentive to enter real serious negotiations, real serious peace talks. Russia has not been pressured enough on the battlefield to conclude that this has to be settled in a negotiation. And the United States pretends that it does not understand that because it has withdrawn all its support for Ukraine. As Trump has said, we are economically not in Ukraine anymore. We are not involved in this conflict economically anymore. So this is where we are. This is basically the context. Now let's see the aftermath of these negotiations, okay? Let us see some of the footage, okay? Let us see what some of the politicians are saying. Putin's aide Ushakov. Ushakov, who has been a crucial person in facilitating the talks between the United States and Russia. The famous person that had the conversation with Witkov, the leaked conversation.
Witkoff and Jared.
Hold on, this is the wrong link. I want to see this next one. There you go. Putin's aide Ushakov, commenting on a possible Trump-Putin meeting, mumbled through his remarks like a student dragged to the blackboard. Unprepared in the end, he called Witkov and Kushner these two people, as if he still wasn't sure who they were or why they had come to the Kremlin. We agreed that at the level of representatives, assistants, and other representatives, we will continue contacts with the Americans, in particular with these two people who came to the Kremlin today. As for a possible meeting at the presidential level, progress we can achieve along this path when we work persistently and persistently, so to speak, along the line of assistance, representatives of the federation budget. So Russia is stalling as always. Russia is just doing everything in its power to... And of course, Russia at the same time will blame Ukraine, will blame everybody for the fact that these negotiations are not leading to any progress, to any effect. Once again, Russia just said, no, we want what we want. We demand what we demand. We will not move on this. And you can take it or leave it. We can just continue the war. We don't care. And of course, Zelenskyy's meeting was cancelled as well. Zelenskyy said that he knows exactly who he is dealing with and expressed that he had no great hopes for this negotiation between the United States and Russia to bring any real step forward. And now let's see what Trump has to say about all of this. Observe.
Witkoff and
Observe.
Witkoff and Jared Kushner were there last night with Vladimir Putin. Can you give us an update about those talks? It sounds from what the Kremlin is saying that they're not going to compromise. Can you tell us what you've...
There you go. The Kremlin has shut down the proposal. And Trump is being asked to give his opinion on the ongoing negotiation, particularly on what happened in Moscow between his representatives and Putin.
I don't know what the Kremlin's doing. I can tell you that they had a reasonably good meeting with President Putin. We're going to find out. It's a war that should have never been started. It's a war, if I were president, we had a rigged election. If I were president, that war would have never happened. It's a terrible thing. But I thought they had a very good meeting yesterday with President Putin. We'll see what happens. It's
Notice lack of any detail. He's not actually giving any information of what happened, what was agreed, what was disagreed. He's just saying there was a good meeting, and then he gives his tired spiel about how the war should have never happened, that it would have never happened if he were to be president, which has no ground. It just has, there's no evidence for that.
you know, when I was in this office and I talked about
This is important, by the way. This is important because this is where Trump blames Zelenskyy for the failure of the negotiations right now. It is Putin that has very aggressively said that Russia will not compromise on anything. And watch now as Trump will blame Zelenskyy for it. Listen to this.
You know, when I was in this office and I talked about no cards, I said, you have no cards. That was the time to settle.
He's referring to the infamous meeting between himself and Zelenskyy earlier during the year when he said that Zelenskyy is ungrateful, that Ukraine has no cards, and that he is dependent on the United States, and he should be grateful, he should bow down. And I believe he also said that Ukraine is gambling with World War III.
Thought that would have been a much better time to settle. But they, in their wisdom, decided not to do that. They have a lot of things against them right now. But
Translation. Trump is insinuating that Ukraine should have settled before because Russia had a lesser advantage at the time when Trump said that Ukraine had no cards, that Russia has bigger advantages now and a lesser incentive to settle. So Trump is blaming Zelenskyy for Russia rejecting the peace proposal because Ukraine should have settled earlier when Trump told him that Ukraine had no cards. Very fascinating that whatever Russia does, whatever Russia does not do, Ukraine will always inevitably be blamed for it because Russia is treated as a lucrative business partner with whom the United States currently does not want to have a bad relationship with. And Ukraine is basically treated as a pest that stands in the way stubbornly, is not willing to end the war, and pave the way for the United States to start making money with Russia. Ukraine is treated as an obstacle to business, an obstacle to making good money. That is the reality of it.
you have President Putin had a very good meeting yesterday with Jared Kushner and with Steve Witkoff. What comes out of that meeting, I can't tell you, because it does take two to tango. You know, Ukraine, I think we have something pretty well worked out with them. They're very satisfied, considering.
There you go. There you go. He sort of very begrudgingly accepted that Russia is not playing ball. But again, it doesn't matter much, since at the end of the day, the ones that are being blamed for it are the Ukrainians and Zelenskyy. The negotiations ended in an abject failure. It is hard to say where the negotiations will go from here. I don't have many hopes for it because it just seems like a dead end. I do not feel like anything will change in a substantial way until the situation on the ground will change in such a way that would force Russia to serious negotiations. Because once again, the goals of the United States and Russia do not align in all of this, as well as the goals of Russia and Ukraine, of course. There's one more thing that I would like to watch with you before we move on. And that is the reaction of the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, to all of this. Because unlike the United States of America under Donald Trump, I do like to, in fact, include the Ukrainian perspective. We're preparing, let's just watch.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці.
I wish you good health, fellow
Українки
Ukrainians.
сьогодні
Today I received regular reports from our team on work with
регулярні
partners.
доповіді нашої команди по роботі з партнерами. Сьогодні
In Brussels today are Ukraine's Minister of Foreign
в
Affairs,
Брюсселі міністр закордонних справ України, а також
the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council,
секретар РНБО та начальник
and the Chief of the General
Генерального
Staff
штабу. На всіх
will working at all levels to secure support defensive,
рівнях ми працюємо, щоб була підтримка і оборона, і
diplomatic and support for our resilience.
дипломатична, і підтримка нашої стійкості. Андрій
Andriy Sibiha represented our state today
Сибіга сьогодні представляв нашу державу у форматі Ради
in the Ukraine-NATO Council format.
на НАТО. Рустем Уміров та
Rustem Umerov and Andriy Hnatov communicated.
Андрій Гнатов спілкувалися з безпековими командами європейських лідерів. Найголовніше
The most important thing is Europe's effective involvement, which is not a guaranteed thing. Europe is actually... Europe is in a tough spot. Europe is being excluded from all this. The biggest card that Europe has in all of this is the frozen Russian assets, which, by the way, Donald Trump wants to just give up to Russia as part of the peace proposal, which is another insanity that Trump wants to push, but that's neither here nor there. The European Union has a big plan for those funds. I might do a separate thing on that. But the involvement of Europe is limited. It is being actively pushed out of the negotiations by both the United States and Russia. Russia is actively creating a narrative in which Europe is the fear-mongering party that does not want to end the war, that just wants to fester war. And it fits the narrative because, again, Europe is looking at this conflict, at the peace negotiations from the perspective of security, from the perspective of not allowing Russia to move forward with its geopolitical plans of getting Ukraine, rebuilding its empire and its influence in Europe and the world, while the United States sees it as a lucrative business opportunity. And that is something that Russia does not like. That Europe is not playing ball in that regard.
це дієва участь Європи у
In our defense and also in guaranteeing security after this war.
нашому захисті. Також у гарантуванні безпеки після цієї війни. Активність
Activity is at its maximum to bring this war to an end.
максимальна, щоб війну завершити. І з нашої сторони
And from our side, from Ukrainian state,
від української держави не буде жодних
there will be no obstacles or delays.
перепон і зволікань. Ми абсолютно
We're fully constructive, very swift in working with partners.
конструктивні, дуже швидкі в роботі з партнерами. І всі це
And everyone acknowledges this, including the American side.
відзначають. Американська сторона також. Готуємо зустрічі
We're preparing meetings in the United States, which has been postponed because of the awful meeting in Moscow.
в Сполучених Штатах Америки після
After the American team returns from Moscow
повернення американської команди з Москви та відповідних
and following the relevant consultations in Washington.
консультацій у Вашингтоні. Рустем Уміров, Андрій Гнатов
Rustem Umerov, Andriy Ignatov, along with the
та
rest
всі, хто потрібен для
of the
перемоги,
negotiating team will continue
продовжать
discussions
розмову з представниками
with envoys of President Trump.
президента Трампа. Чекаємо на
We expect news in the coming days regarding such meetings.
найближчими днями щодо таких зустрічей, контактів, перемовин.
Contacts and talks, whether in person or by phone.
Особисті зустрічі чи телефонні розмови є.
All partners are in regular contact.
Постійний контакт між усіма партнерами та
Once again, we're in a situation where, of course, Ukraine is treating this whole thing a lot more seriously. Ukraine is actually engaging in peace talks while Russia is engaging in basically rejecting the peace talks because Russia has no incentive to end the war.
між партнерами та Україною. Все зараз
Everything is now proceeding quite effectively.
відбувається доволі результативно. На зустрічах в
At meetings in Geneva and Florida, Ukraine was heard,
Женеві та у Флориді Україну чули і до України
and Ukraine was listened to. Definitely not by the American side. The American side is definitely much more listening to what Russia is saying,
дослухались, і це важливо.
and that matters.
Розраховуємо, що
We
надалі
expect it will continue exactly this
буде
way.
саме так. Лише
A dignified peace is only possible if Ukraine's
із
interests
врахуванням інтересів України можливо
are taken into account, something which Russia will never do. Russia will never do it on its own. With its Russia has to be forced into taking these interests into account. There is no other way. There is no way that Russia will, without any changes on the battlefield, agree to accept the Ukrainian perspective. That is, you can forget about it.
достойний мир. Також
I
продовжуємо
will also continue at my level
на своєму рівні спілкування з
to engage with leaders practically every day. And that is where Europe has to significantly step up if any of this is to end well.
лідерами. Фактично кожен день координація,
Coordinating, exchanging ideas, agreeing how to talk
обмін ідеями, домовленості. Як говорити з іншими
to other leaders and what can bring more security.
лідерами і що може дати більше безпеки. Зараз
Right now, the world clearly feels that there
світ точно відчуває, що можливість
is a real opportunity to end the war. No, I have no such. I disagree. I have no such hopes. There is no real opportunity to end the war right now. I am afraid that the war will go on for quite a bit longer, especially with how these negotiations are going thus far. I have zero hopes that this war will end anytime soon, actually.
закінчити війну є. І треба
And current diplomatic activity in negotiations
активність в перемовинах підкріплювати
must be backed by pressure on Russia. And this is the key aspect that is not present at this moment, the pressure on Russia.
тиском на Росію. Саме від такого
Everything depends on this very combination. Yeah. And that is why I feel like this will fail, because this combination is not happening. The biggest pressure on Russia is the one that is being enacted by Ukraine itself. The destruction of the refineries, the destruction of the shadow fleet recently, the sinking of the shadow fleet ships near Turkey. Those are things that are being done by Ukraine on the ground through the use of military force. But little to no pressure is being there's little to no pressure on Russia by the United States, and the European pressure on Russia is just not really significant enough to do anything. So unless that changes, I feel like this negotiation will not lead to anything substantial.
такої комбінації все залежить. Конструктив
Constructive diplomacy plus pressure on the aggressor. And that is a problem, considering that the United States does not even treat Russia as the aggressor, as I've mentioned before, as I've explained before.
дипломатія плюс тиск на агресора. Обидва
Both components work toward peace, and one component is sorely missing.
компоненти працюють на мир. Важливо
It's also important that there is constructive internal work in Ukraine.
також, що є конструктивна внутрішня робота в Україні. Я дякую
I thank the parliament for
парламентарям за
voting
голосування за державний бюджет на
on
наступний
the state budget for next year, which is another problem that Ukraine is facing. Its hole in the budget.
Це гарантує, що
This guarantees that we will deliver on the
фінансову
financial
роботу
work.
ми забезпечимо. Уряд України
The government of Ukraine is working well.
добре працює із нашими партнерами.
We're our partners to cover deficits. And Europe is working overtime to actually figure out how to cover these deficits. No definite solution has been found today.
Щоб покрити дефіцити. Є
That's important thing to talk about as well. There's an understanding on how this will be done. There's an understanding on how this will be done, but there's definitely not an agreement on how this will be done. There's definitely not an agreement between partners on how these deficits will be filled, and I would like to talk about that next. But let's continue with this for now. Let's just say that there's a lot of hurdles before Ukraine, before the subject of these deficits can be solved. It is not a simple conversation by
розуміння,
any
як
means.
це буде зроблено. Продовжуємо
We're also continuing the full reorganization
також і повної реорганізації та очищення
and cleansing policy of the energy and defense sectors. Okay, let's see. So that's it. I don't think we have to watch this anymore. Zelenskyy has very eloquently verbalized why this negotiation, as it's going right now, has very low chances of success. As unfortunate as it is, I just do not I just don't believe that this will lead to anything. So yeah. Oh. Okay. I would like to be able to end this on a positive note, but you know what? I am a bitter person, so I will end this on a very negative note, because why not? I will end this particular segment on a very negative note because I'm Polish, and just listen to this. Listen to the Secretary of NATO, who is the biggest ass licker of Trump that exists currently. So a question is being asked.
Let's imagine the negotiations break down, both sides continue fighting, and USA stops supplying weapons to Ukraine even for money. Do you have a plan B for this? Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. What if this whole negotiation ends in a fiasco and the United States just washes its hands of the whole affair? No support for Ukraine, not even conditional. We're not even going to sell weapons, nothing. We're out. We're out completely. Does NATO have an alternative way of supporting Ukraine? Is there a plan B?
Well, I do not. No, I don't think that plan B we have to think about, because the US is very consistent in support for Ukraine.
That's bullshit. The United States is not very consistent in supporting Ukraine. It has already cut intelligence once. It has already stopped all aid packages that were consistently flowing into Ukraine before. It has switched from aid packages model to selling weapons to NATO model. There's no consistency here whatsoever. There's a very real possibility that the United States might decide not even to sell weapons anymore. And in that case, it is very comforting to see that NATO has no plan B. There's no plan B. Who cares about planning? Who cares about preparing for any possibility? I am just here to suck on Trump's dried up cock. That's all that I care about. It's pathetic, and this is exactly why we are where we are. Because NATO is depending on the United States. And there is no plan B apart from the United States. And when Trump is the president of the United States and fucks over everybody, there is no alternative.
Like all NATO allies are very consistent. Of course, what the US told us is we want to supply Ukraine with the necessary weapons.
It does not. Tomahawks? Where are the tomahawks? Please tell me. Please tell me where are the tomahawks that Trump has denied to Ukraine time and time and time again. What a joke. What a pathetic, pathetic joke.
Both lethal and non-lethal. But we expect Europeans and Canadians to step up when it comes to the paying for it. And that's this Pearl program where the US is delivering the necessary weapons, including the air defense systems. And
what about tomahawks?
The PAC-3 missiles for the Patriot systems, but also for the other air defense systems, and all the other stuff and all the military gear you need to stay as strong as possible in the fight, paid for by European and Canadian allies. That is the big program. It started in July, and at the moment already 4 billion, and I think by the end of the year 5 billion of that supply will have been delivered to Ukraine, critical material. But I have no reason to think that we have to prepare for those events.
There you go. There's no plan B. Plan B is good luck. That is plan B.